I want to start with something we didn't even tell you we were going to talk about today, and that is Bryan Kohberger. You're a lawyer and you're a journalist, so I'm going to throw this at you knowing that you can handle this from just your experience on both of those fronts. Something rather, I don't want to say infuriating, but definitely frustrating, annoying, and disappointing has taken place yet again at the New York Times. So they interviewed Mel Kohberger, short for Melissa, who is Bryan Kohberger, admitted quadruple murderer of the Idaho 4, a crime that took place in 2022 at the University of Idaho while these 4 students either slept in their beds or were in their rooms at 4 a.m. When Bryan Kohberger, who was pursuing his PhD in criminology at the neighboring University of Washington, just 10 miles away, sneaked into their off-campus apartment at the University of Idaho and murdered all 4 of these young people. 2 were 20, 2 were 21. Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, and Xana Kernodle, and Casey Gonsalves. And we know he did the crime because he now admitted it to save his life this summer. He copped a plea deal in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. Well, now his sister comes out, and in what is an obvious attempt to whitewash whatever her family's involvement in this, if any, was, she gives this interview to the New York Times trying to sound very sympathetic. And I'll tell you the reason I have a problem with it. I don't blame Bryan Kohberger's crimes on his family. I'm not a lunatic. But there have long been questions about what the family knew and when, and in particular, what suspicions this sister, Melissa, had about her brother, and what, if anything, her mother and Bryan's mother, same woman, knew about his crimes. And I'm going to tell you the reporting I'm basing this off of, including that of Howard Bloom, who has owned this story from the beginning, doing exclusive updates on Graydon Carter's publication Airmail, on this show as well, for NBC and Dateline, in reporting that was so explosive and on point, it actually led the judge to delay the trial or consider delaying the trial because it was such a big scoop, all the stuff that he and Dateline got. Anyway, Howard Bloom knows what he's writing about and has been proven right time and time again in this case. So she gives this interview, Glenn, and it's the reporter's name is Mike Baker. Not that Mike Baker, not our former CIA friend, a different reporter. And this guy, from what I can tell, has let this woman completely rehab her image and her family's image without knowing much about the case or without testing much about the case. First, she says, okay, there's some interesting background, some of which we covered in today's AM update. She says she was, by the way, her picture, she's there, she has blue hair. She has like a goth t-shirt on. She has heavy, weird makeup. And her story is that she was just hired to go work as a mental health therapist. I got to tell you, if I walked into my new therapist and saw this woman sitting there, I would run the other way. A goth, blue-haired, sister of Bryan Kohberger, it's a no. And I wasn't the only one who felt that way because she had, she says, to give up her job that she just got as a mental health counselor as soon as her brother got arrested. Shocking. She talks about how when she first heard about the crimes, this is long before his arrest, they happened 2 months earlier, it occurred to her that he was just the type of person who would leave his door unlocked and go out on late night jogs. So she called him and said, "Bryan, you're running outside and this psycho killer's on the loose. Be careful." He thanked her for checking on him and assured her he would stay safe. Of course, he knew he would because he knew he was the psycho killer and that there was no random criminal running around trying to kill college students other than Bryan Kohberger. Then in early December that year, they write, her brother returned to their parents' home in Pennsylvania for the holidays. And later that month, he got a call from their sister, Amanda. I'm sorry, Ms. Kohberger, Mel, got a call from their sister, Amanda, who said cops had burst into the house in the middle of the night and arrested Bryan in handcuffs. The sister, Amanda, said to Mel, "I'm with the FBI. Bryan's been arrested." Mel claims, "I was like, for what?" The response from Amanda, "The Idaho murders." For a brief moment, Mel wondered if it was a prank. Then a sense of nausea overtook her. Then we go on for several pages about what a beautiful family they had. The mother was Catholic, raised them with Catholic values. They read books like Little House on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. books we read in my very own family, for that matter. And I too was raised by a Catholic mother and father. And I would submit for the record, these are not the values that are taught that would lead one to become a psychopathic quadruple murderer at age in mid-20s. She talks about how she's been angered by internet posts from people who speculated about her family and what they had known about Kohberger being the killer. I've always been the person who has spoken up for what's right, she says. If I ever had a reason to believe my brother did anything, I would have turned him in. Absolutely no scrutiny of this by the Times reporter, and no testing of it with what's already been reported extensively about this family and this case. He does, however, let her talk about how poor Bryan was overweight. He was, now they believe, somebody with autism. He endured persistent bullying. He wrote online of having no emotion, little remorse, and feeling like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth. Later, he spiraled into heroin addiction. How did all that happen, by the way, in such a perfect family? Just reading Little House on the Prairie and spending so much quality time together. It's never addressed. We were all worried that he was on the path to an early death, but then became so proud of him because he had overcome so much. And notwithstanding his socially awkward persona and his abrasive nature, he wound up, never violent, by the way, she says, at the University of Washington pursuing his PhD. Okay. Then she goes on to say, in the days before the raid, they'd gathered for Christmas. They were hugging tightly. They played TV party games. I'm sure it's just the perfect of Norman Rockwell Americana inside this house that produced one of the most prolific young serial killers we've seen in recent decades. Miss Kohberger, Mel, was cleaning up in the kitchen. A sharp edge of foil caused her finger to bleed, and her brother, initially expressing disgust at the sight of blood, then helped clean the cut and cover it with a bandage. Of course, we don't get into the nature of the crime, which was by knife, that he murdered these 4 innocents at the University of Idaho so brutally, Glenn. Mike Baker, I guess, didn't think this was worth mentioning, but I realized this is why he included the detail in here, because this feigning disgust at the sight of blood, but this should have been brought home, they were so bloody, these crimes, that the house itself began to bleed. We saw in the police photos, which I am now putting on the board for the viewing audience on YouTube, this is the exterior of the home, the murder house on the University of Idaho, where blood is dripping outside of the house. That's how badly these young people were hacked to death and the amount of blood that they spilled. A new year means new financial goals, like making sure your savings are secure and diversified. Will this be the year you decide to talk to someone from Birch Gold Group? They use an educational approach with a deep understanding of macroeconomics. There are forces pushing the dollar lower and gold higher, which is why they believe every American should own physical gold. So until January 30th, if you're a first-time gold buyer, Birch Gold is offering a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. To claim eligibility and start the process, you just text MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold can help you roll an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and you are still eligible for a rebate of up to $10,000. Consider making right now your first time to buy gold and take advantage of a rebate up to $10,000 when you buy before January 30th. Text MK to the number 989898. Claim your eligibility today. Again, text MK to 989898. So here he is, feigning disgust is the word used in the piece at the sight of blood. And she says, Mel does, that she recalls in those days at home, Bryan only briefly mentioning the Idaho murder, saying the investigators were still hunting for the killer. She says, now, here we get to it. Miss Kohberger, Mel, knowing that her brother had driven a white Elantra back from school, said she had briefly wondered if they were looking for the same model. But then she learned that his was from a different year, 2015, and they were only thinking that the model was between years 2011 and 2013. Now that right there is such an obvious lie, Glenn. Like I don't know if you have siblings. All these years we've been together, I don't know what your family of origin looks like. But if your mind goes to, my brother might be the homicidal maniac who took those 4 lives, but technically his white Elantra was built 2 years after the years they're looking for, I'm calling bullshit on you. If you've placed your sibling in the field of possible killers, you're actually not relieved that maybe it was the cutoff was 2013 as opposed to 2015, which, by the way, they later updated anyway. Okay, I'm getting to this. So then they write about how, that the mother has been praying daily now for families of the victims, that Mel Kohberger has put the names of the victims and their birthdays into her digital calendar so she will get reminders about them. During the holidays, her family has felt grief that Mr. Kohberger could not be with them, but then she would think of the victims' families and the pain they must be feeling. Very careful to say, there's only one set of victims and I'm not on the list. I get that. Okay, here is what we know from Howard Bloom. He has reported the following, that Mel Kohberger reportedly confronted her father, Michael Kohberger, with her fears that Bryan was involved in the murders. The book, Howard's, which he wrote, When the Night Comes Calling, great book, by the way, the book claims that her father, quote, turned his back and walked away when faced with his daughter's suspicion. This is the daughter, Mel, being interviewed by the Times. The sister, Mel, was reportedly a witness to her brother engaging in odd behavior, such as wearing his rubber gloves and placing his personal garbage into Ziploc bags before disposing of it in a neighbor's trash can in the days leading up to his arrest. That detail, too, omitted by Mike Baker. Nothing about the sister reportedly witnessing Bryan doing the most suspicious thing of all. The thing that could have led a jury to convict him even without his DNA on the knife sheath. Taking all of his personal trash, putting it into Ziploc baggies, and then making sure it went out into the neighbor's garbage bin instead of that at his home of origin after he'd gone back to the Poconos with his dad, who drove him cross country. And what, if anything, did the dad know? And here's the real capper, the final real capper before I give it to you, Glenn Greenwald. The mother who's praying for the victims, and she's Catholic, and the little house on the prairie, blah, 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 blah. The mother is at the center of this whole thing because while the father did not even bother to show up to the sentencing, allegedly he wasn't feeling well or was having heart trouble, and Mel stayed home with him, the mother showed up. And the mother has been there for Bryan all along. When we finally got a hold of his phone records, we found out that the murders, which were done at between 4:05 and 4:20 a.m. It was in a 12-minute span, right, in that exact time frame. And he had turned off his phone from like 2:30 to 4:30 a.m. there while he committed these crimes. Then he turned his phone back on. So he gets back to his home, University of Washington, by, let's say, 5:45, 6 at the latest. What happens, or 4:45, 5 at the latest, what happens when he gets there? He calls his mother within an hour. We know from his phone records that at 6:13 a.m., this is within 2 hours of having hacked 4 innocents to death with a knife, just him. At 6:13 a.m., he made an attempt to call his mother. A minute later, angry that he couldn't get her, he called his dad, asking why his mother did not answer. At 6:17 a.m., he connects with his mother for 36 minutes. At 8:03 a.m., he calls his mother again and speaks to her for 54 minutes while driving back to the crime scene in Moscow, Idaho. Why was he doing that? Had she told him, make sure you go back and see about the knife sheath? Had he confessed anything to the mother? It's very hard to believe they didn't discuss it 120 minutes after he did it, when he was obviously very insistent on getting a hold of the mother in the first place. At 9 a.m., another 9-minute conversation with the mother, totaling over 3 hours of conversation that day via 5 calls, none of which is mentioned in this rehabilitative puff piece in the New York Times that did absolutely no kicking of the sister's story or tires, Glenn. And it was a journalistic fail where this guy obviously let himself get used by a young woman with some psychological training on how to manipulate people, as it turns out, according to me. And this had no business appearing in a paper of record like the Times. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.